The sound was sharp. A crack like a branch breaking under heavy weight, but it wasn't wood. It was her cane, her lifeline to the world snapped in two by the very hands sworn to protect her. Gasps filled the air, pedestrians froze. Some pulled out their phones, others stood in stunned silence. In the middle of it all was a blind black woman, trembling, gripping the jagged remains of her cane as if it could still guide her. Her world had just gone dark in a way it hadn't before. The officer who did it, he didn't flinch. His face held arrogance, the kind of cruelty that comes from knowing his badge was a shield. He saw her as powerless, vulnerable, alone. But she wasn't. Just beyond the crowd, someone was moving fast. Her son, a man the officer did not recognize. A man whose name carried weight. A man whose voice could not be silenced. And in that moment, everything was about to change. Morning light crept over the city, spilling gold across the sidewalks, catching the glint of glass towers and old brick buildings alike. The streets hummed with routine, buses sighed at their stops, footsteps beat steady rhythms, voices tangled in casual chatter. But in the middle of this ordinary scene walked a woman who moved differently. Her name was Evelyn Carter. She was in her late 50s, tall but slender, her frame wrapped in a long navy coat. In her hand, the smooth white cane tapped against the pavement, a rhythmic click that told her where curbs ended and crossings began. Evelyn had been blind for over 2 decades, yet she walked with the grace of someone who refused to surrender to her limits. Her world was built on sound: the distant honk of a cab, the soft shuffle of leaves along the sidewalk, the rise and fall of strangers' conversations. She carried herself with dignity, her posture firm, her chin slightly raised as if daring the city to challenge her. But the truth was, the world did challenge her. Every day. For Evelyn, racism wasn't an abstract idea or a headline in the news. It lived in the whispers she overheard, the awkward silences that followed her requests for help, the moments when people spoke to her as though she were invisible or worse, less than human. She had grown used to subtle cruelty. The shopkeeper who sighed impatiently when she asked for assistance. The woman who tugged her child closer on the bus, as though blindness could be contagious. The security guard who once followed her through a department store, convinced that a blind black woman alone must be up to something. Still, Evelyn endured. She had learned to carry these moments quietly, folding them into the hidden chapters of her life. But what she didn't know was that this day would be different. This day, silence would no longer be an option. It began with a walk to the pharmacy. Evelyn's son had insisted she let him drive her, but she had waved him off with a smile. "I need the exercise," she said. "Besides, I know these streets better than you think," and she did. Every corner, every crack in the sidewalk, every intersection had been memorized through repetition. She mapped her city not with sight, but with patience and memory. The sun was high now, pressing warmth into her back as she crossed a busy intersection. She listened for the chirp of the crosswalk signal, felt the flow of people moving beside her, and stepped forward with quiet confidence. To her left, a car idled. To her right, footsteps hurried. Behind her, a bicycle bell rang. She catalogued each sound carefully as though composing music. Halfway across the street, she heard it, a sharp whistle, followed by a commanding voice. "Hey, stop right there." The words sliced through the noise. Evelyn paused, her cane resting against the asphalt. The voice grew louder, closer, dripping with authority. "Didn't you hear me? I said stop." Confusion knit her brow. She wasn't running a light. The crosswalk signal still chirped in her favor. Slowly, she turned her face toward the voice. "Yes?" she asked calmly. Heavy boots struck the ground. A presence loomed over her, thick with hostility. "What are you doing out here with that stick?" The man barked. Evelyn tightened her grip on the cane. "I'm crossing the street," she replied evenly. The officer scoffed. "Don't get smart with me. You're waving that thing around like a weapon. You think you can just swing it at people?" Gasps rippled from the crowd of pedestrians now gathering. Someone murmured, "She's blind." Evelyn straightened her shoulders. Her voice, though steady, carried the weight of exhaustion. "This is not a weapon. It's a cane. I'm visually impaired." But the officer didn't back down. His eyes narrowed, his jaw clenched. Years of unchecked authority had hardened him into a man who saw threats where none existed, and disrespect where there was only dignity. He took a step closer. "You people always have an excuse, don't you?" The words landed heavy, dripping venom. Evelyn's heart sank, but she refused to let fear show on her face. She'd heard those words before. You people. They weren't just about her blindness. They weren't just about her independence. They were about her skin. For the crowd, it was a tense, confusing scene. A blind woman standing firm, her cane tapping nervously against the ground. A uniformed officer, bristling with aggression. The air thickened, every second stretching longer than it should. Evelyn spoke softly, "Officer, please. I'm just trying to get to the pharmacy." But he wasn't listening. His hand shot forward, fingers wrapping around the cane. Before Evelyn could react, he yanked it from her grasp. Her breath caught. The world went silent for half a second until the crack rang out. The cane split in two, its pieces falling uselessly to the pavement. Gasps erupted. Someone shouted, "Hey, that's her guide." "What's wrong with you?" Another voice cursed under their breath. A phone camera lifted higher into the air. Evelyn's knees weakened. The cane wasn't just a stick. It was her independence, her freedom, her connection to the world. Without it, the city became a maze of shadows and uncertainty. She felt the ground tilt beneath her feet, her body swaying as if the earth itself had betrayed her. The officer tossed the broken cane aside, his smirk sharp and unrepentant. "Maybe now you'll learn to follow the rules," he sneered. In that moment, Evelyn felt small. But around her, the crowd grew restless. Whispers turned to murmurs. Murmurs turned to shouts. And in the distance, someone was pushing through the mass of onlookers, fast, urgent, unstoppable. Her son. She couldn't see him, but she could feel him. The familiar rhythm of his footsteps, the deep timbre of his voice cutting through the chaos. "Mom!" Relief washed over her like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. The officer glanced up, unbothered, unaware. He didn't know who he had just humiliated. He didn't know that the man rushing forward wasn't just a protective son, but someone with power, a name that carried weight in courtrooms, on television screens, and in the very halls of justice that shielded officers like him. What was about to happen would shatter the silence Evelyn had carried for years. Because today, her pain would not stay hidden. Today, her story would be heard. The crowd thickened, voices swelling into outrage. Some held up phones, recording every second. Others called out, demanding answers, their anger fueling the moment. But Evelyn stood frozen, clutching the empty air where her cane once was. Her chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, and though she couldn't see the faces around her, she felt every stare, every gasp, every ounce of pity and rage directed toward the man in uniform. Then her son's hand touched her arm. "Mom, I'm here." The sound of his voice, firm yet trembling with fury, wrapped around her like an anchor. She tilted her head toward him, her lips quivering as she whispered, "He broke it. He broke my cane." Her son's jaw tightened. His name was Marcus Carter. In his early 30s, he was tall, broad-shouldered, with the sharp presence of a man who had been in too many battles for justice. To the world, Marcus was more than just a son. He was a well-known civil rights attorney, a rising figure who had taken on police brutality cases and won. His words carried weight. His presence stirred attention. But the officer didn't recognize him, not yet. "Sir, step back," the cop barked, raising a hand in warning. "This doesn't concern you." Marcus's eyes blazed. "Doesn't concern me? That's my mother. You just assaulted a blind woman and destroyed the tool she depends on to move. Do you have any idea what you've done?" The officer's smirk faltered, just slightly. He scanned the crowd, noticing for the first time the cameras, the whispers of "she's blind." "He broke it on purpose. What the hell's wrong with him?" "But arrogance is a stubborn disease." He squared his shoulders, puffed his chest, and spat back. "Your mother was waving that thing dangerously. I acted to keep order." The crowd erupted in disbelief. Someone shouted, "She can't even see, you idiot." Another voice, trembling with anger, cried out, "We saw what you did. You snapped it in half." Marcus stepped closer, his voice a blade. Her cane wasn't a weapon, it was her independence. And you destroyed it because of your prejudice. Because you couldn't stand the sight of a black woman walking with dignity. Gasps rippled, the officer's face reddened. He reached for his belt, hand brushing the holster of his taser, but the crowd surged forward, their presence thick with resistance. Phones captured every angle, every breath. Every second of this unfolding nightmare. Evelyn, trembling, clutched Marcus's hand. "Please, don't let this get worse," she whispered. But for Marcus, silence was no longer an option. Years of buried anger, of reading names of men and women brutalized by people in uniforms, of standing in courtrooms where truth was twisted and justice delayed, everything rose to the surface. "Officer," Marcus said, his tone steady now, heavy with authority, "do you know who I am?" The man sneered. "Should I care?" "Yes," Marcus replied, "because my name is Marcus Carter. Civil rights attorney. And I promise you this moment is going to follow you, into the station, into the courts. Onto every screen in this city." The crowd erupted again, this time in approval. Cheers and shouts of encouragement cut through the tension. "That's right. Tell him. We got it all on camera." The officer's confidence wavered. His eyes darted left, then right. He wasn't in control anymore. The badge on his chest, once a shield, now burned like a spotlight exposing him. But instead of retreating, he doubled down. His pride wouldn't let him back off. "Don't try to intimidate me," he snapped. "I don't care who you are. You people always play the victim, always looking for someone to blame." Those words landed like a hammer, you people. The same poison Evelyn had endured in silence now poured into the open. Marcus's fists clenched, but he didn't strike. He knew his greatest weapon wasn't his strength, it was his voice. "You just confirmed everything the world needs to hear," he said coldly. "You don't see her as a person. You don't see me as a person. You see color, you see an enemy. But today, officer, the world sees you." Phones zoomed closer. A teenager shouted, "Live stream's blowing up." Another whispered, "This is going viral." The officer's jaw twitched, sweat beaded on his brow. He looked at Evelyn, who stood trembling, blind eyes lifted toward the sound of her son's voice. For the first time, the officer seemed to realize the weight of what he had done. But pride is louder than guilt. "Get off the street," he ordered, though his voice cracked with uncertainty. "Or I'll arrest you both." Marcus let out a bitter laugh. "Arrest us? For what? For being black? For walking with a cane? For daring to exist?" The crowd roared. Strangers who had once been silent onlookers now became defenders, their voices rising in chorus. "Justice for her! Leave her alone! We saw everything!" The officer's hand hovered over his radio. Backup would come, but it wouldn't come fast enough. Right now he was outnumbered, not in force, but in truth. Evelyn, sensing the chaos swelling, squeezed her son's hand. Her voice was fragile but resolute. "Marcus, don't let them silence this. Not this time." And in that moment, Marcus made a choice. He would not walk his mother quietly to safety. He would not let this incident vanish into the shadows of bureaucracy, where complaints disappeared and officers walked away untouched. This moment would be the line in the sand. He raised his voice, projecting beyond the officer, beyond the crowd, into history itself. "This is not just about my mother. This is about every black person treated as less than human. This is about every abuse hidden behind a badge. Today, we don't walk away in silence. Today, the world will know." The crowd erupted into thunderous applause. Cars honked in solidarity. A chant began to rise, faint at first, then louder. "Justice, justice, justice." The officer's face hardened, but his hands trembled. For the first time, he felt powerless not because he lacked authority, but because truth had stripped him of it. And as Evelyn leaned against her son, the broken cane at her feet, she realized something. This was no longer her private burden. Her pain had become a spark, and the fire had only just begun. The chant shook the street. "Justice, justice, justice." Dozens of voices rose as one, echoing against the concrete towers, bouncing through the air like a drumbeat of defiance. The officer, red-faced and sweating, shifted uncomfortably under the weight of so many eyes. His hand twitched on his belt, but he didn't move. The balance of power was shifting, and for the first time, he could feel it slipping away. But Evelyn wasn't focused on him. Her world had become smaller. Her broken cane lay on the pavement, a sharp reminder that her independence had been shattered in public. She clung to Marcus's arm, torn between two instincts, the need to protect her son from escalating danger, and the urge to finally break her silence after decades of quiet endurance. "Marcus," she whispered, voice trembling. "I just want to go home." He looked at her, his jaw clenched. "Mom, if we walk away, this dies here. They'll twist the story. They'll say you provoked him, that I interfered. Without these people, without these cameras, you'll be erased." Evelyn turned her face toward the sound of chanting. She could feel the energy, the collective heartbeat of strangers rallying for her. It was overwhelming, like standing in the center of a storm. "I didn't ask for this," she said softly. Marcus's eyes softened. "Neither did George Floyd, neither did Breonna Taylor, neither did any of them. But if we don't act now, Mom, we're letting him win. We're letting them win." The words hit her harder than she expected. For years, Evelyn had kept her battles private. Racist comments at work, suspicious glares in grocery stores, the sting of being treated as invisible. She had swallowed each wound, telling herself she was too tired to fight, too small to matter. But now, the world was watching. The officer shifted again, snapping, "All right, that's enough. Disperse or you'll all be charged with obstruction." No one moved. Phones stayed raised. The chant grew louder. Marcus turned to the crowd, his voice carrying like a preacher's. "You've seen it with your own eyes. You've recorded it with your own hands. Don't let them bury this story. Stay here. Stand with her." The crowd roared in agreement. A middle-aged woman stepped forward. "We're not going anywhere." A teenager lifted his phone higher, shouting, "It's live 10,000 people watching right now." The officer paled. He muttered into his radio, his voice low and frantic. Backup was on its way. Evelyn's fingers tightened around Marcus's sleeve. "If they bring more police," her voice broke. "Marcus, I can't lose you." "Not to them." Her son bent close, his forehead nearly touching hers. "You won't lose me. Not today, not ever. But if we run, Mom, we lose something bigger. We lose the chance to turn this pain into power." Tears welled in her eyes. She couldn't see the crowd, but she could feel them, dozens of strangers becoming witnesses, becoming allies. For the first time, her private suffering was no longer private. And that terrified her, because telling the truth meant reliving every wound, every humiliation, every moment she had been dismissed, ignored, or reduced to "you people." The choice loomed heavy before her: retreat into silence or step into fire. Marcus's hand cupped hers. "Mom, this is your story, but it can be their story too. Do you want it buried? Or do you want it heard?" The officer barked again, louder, desperate. "Last warning! Disperse immediately." And in that moment between fear and courage, between silence and voice, Evelyn made her choice. She straightened her shoulders, wiped her tears with trembling fingers, and stepped forward, her broken cane clutched in one hand like a shattered flag. Her voice cracked but carried. "My name is Evelyn Carter," she declared. "I am blind. And today, this officer destroyed the only thing that lets me walk freely in this world. He called me a threat. He called me you people, but I am not invisible. I am not a threat. I am a human being, and I will not be silenced." The street erupted, applause thundered. Cheers cut through the tension like lightning. The officer staggered back, his face draining of color. He hadn't expected her to speak. He hadn't expected her to fight. Marcus's eyes burned with pride. "That's it, Mom, that's it." But Evelyn wasn't done. She raised the broken cane high, the jagged wood trembling in her hand. "This is not just my cane. This is a symbol of every freedom they've tried to take from us, every dignity they've tried to break. But hear me now. We are stronger than this. We are louder than this. And we will not bow." The chant roared again. "Justice! Justice! Justice!" For the first time, Evelyn's voice joined them. Her choice had been made. The breaking point wasn't just the cane, it was her silence. And now her silence was gone. The street was no longer just a street. It had become a stage, a courtroom, a battlefield. The broken cane at Evelyn's feet was no longer just splintered plastic and wood, it was evidence. It was a symbol. It was the spark. Within minutes, more police cruisers arrived, their sirens slicing the air. Blue and red lights flickered across the faces of the crowd. Officers poured out, their hands resting on batons and belts heavy with weapons. The atmosphere grew tense, the air thick with the threat of violence. But the crowd didn't move. They stood shoulder to shoulder, phones still lifted high. The chant grew louder, carried on the wind like a hymn. Justice for Evelyn. Justice for Evelyn. Marcus stood tall beside his mother, shielding her with his body, his eyes burning with defiance. He had been in this place before, at rallies, at marches, at protests where officers lined the streets with riot gear and shields. But never like this. Never with his own mother at the center. Evelyn's hands trembled, but she held her ground. She could hear the footsteps of approaching officers, the crackle of radios, the impatient shuffle of boots. Every instinct screamed at her to step back, to disappear into safety. But safety, she realized, had always been an illusion. For years, she had hidden her scars beneath quiet smiles and polite silence. Today, those scars were visible, and she was done hiding. An officer with a stern face and hard eyes stepped forward. His voice carried authority, polished but cold. "This demonstration is unlawful. You are obstructing traffic. Disperse immediately or we will be forced to take action." The crowd jeered. Someone shouted back, "We're not moving." Another yelled, "We saw what he did, arrest him." Evelyn lifted her chin, her voice cutting through the noise. "I'm not leaving. I was humiliated in broad daylight. My dignity was broken in front of strangers. If you want me gone, you'll have to drag me." Her words silenced the crowd for a beat, then erupted into wild applause. Marcus placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Mom, you don't have to push yourself." But Evelyn cut him off. "I've been pushed all my life. It's time I push back." The commanding officer's jaw tightened. He turned to the cop who had broken her cane. "What happened here?" The officer, his arrogance cracked, now stammered, She was waving it dangerously." "I thought." "You thought wrong?" A woman from the crowd interrupted, her voice sharp with fury. "We all saw it. You grabbed it." "You broke it." "Don't lie now." Dozens of voices joined, shouting, confirming. Phone screens glowed like torches of accountability. For the first time, the officer looked small, trapped. His gaze darted around, searching for an escape. But the cameras had locked him in. Marcus seized the moment. "You want to disperse this crowd?" His voice boomed like a verdict. "Then do what's right. Apologize to my mother. Acknowledge what you did. Show these people you serve justice, not just power." The crowd fell into tense silence, waiting. The officer's lips twisted, his pride warred with his fear. Apologize to a blind black woman in public with cameras rolling? To him it felt like defeat. But every second he hesitated only deepened his guilt in the eyes of the world. Finally he muttered, "I didn't mean." "Louder!" Someone shouted. "Look at her!" Another cried. The officer's face burned crimson. He swallowed hard, then forced out the words, I'm sorry." It was barely audible, but the crowd erupted anyway, half in triumph, half in anger at how empty it sounded. Evelyn stood still, her face calm but her heart pounding. She had lived long enough to know the difference between apology and survival. His words carried no remorse, only desperation. But even so, she had won something. He had been forced to speak, forced to bow, however reluctantly, to truth. Marcus raised his voice again. "This doesn't end here. My mother deserves justice, not empty words. We will pursue this in court. We will pursue this in the press. And we will not stop until real change is made." The crowd roared in agreement. Journalists who had rushed to the scene scribbled furiously. Cameras from local news stations rolled. The story was no longer just a live stream. It was news. It was history. And with that, the officers backed down. They didn't clear the crowd. They didn't drag Evelyn away. The presence of cameras, of witnesses, of truth itself was too strong. The system that had always protected them now threatened to expose them. The cruisers stayed, the lights flashed, but no one moved against Evelyn again. When the adrenaline finally ebbed, when the chants softened into murmurs, Evelyn felt her knees weaken. Marcus caught her before she fell, guiding her gently to a nearby bench. She lowered herself slowly, her body trembling from exhaustion. The broken cane lay across her lap, jagged and useless. She ran her fingers along the splintered edge, her throat tightening. "This was my freedom," she whispered, and he broke it like it was nothing. Marcus knelt beside her. His eyes, though fierce in public, now brimmed with sorrow. "I promise you, Mom, this isn't the end. We'll make them answer for this. You won't have to fight alone anymore." She reached out, touching his cheek with gentle fingers. "I didn't want you to carry this burden, Marcus. You've already carried so much." He took her hand, holding it firmly. "I was made for this. You gave me the strength to fight. And today you showed me your strength too. You're not just my mother, you're a warrior." Her lips curved into the faintest smile, though tears slid silently down her cheeks. The crowd began to disperse slowly, leaving in groups, still buzzing with anger and solidarity. Strangers approached Evelyn, some placing gentle hands on her shoulder, others whispering words of support. "You're brave. We're with you. Don't give up." For the first time in her life, Evelyn felt the weight of community pressing around her, not pity, but power. But she also felt the cost. Her body ached from fear. Her heart throbbed with the memory of humiliation. Her mind reeled with questions of what would come next: lawsuits, headlines, threats. She had opened a door that could never be closed. And yet, she knew she had done the right thing. Her silence was gone, and in its place a storm was rising. Days passed, but the echo of that moment did not fade. The video spread like wildfire, first across social media, then on local news, and soon across national headlines. Millions watched the clip, a blind black woman clutching her broken cane, a police officer sneering above her, a son stepping in with words that cut sharper than any weapon. Racist cop snaps blind woman's cane. Civil rights attorney confronts officer in viral video. Everyday racism exposed on city streets. Each headline carried a piece of Evelyn's pain, but also her defiance. At first, the attention overwhelmed her. Reporters camped outside her small apartment. Strangers sent letters, flowers, donations for new mobility aids. Some offered apologies on behalf of a system they didn't control. Others shared their own stories of humiliation and injustice. For Evelyn, it was bittersweet. She had never sought fame. She had never wanted her name in lights. All she wanted was dignity, the freedom to walk her city with her cane and her pride intact. But now, her story had become a mirror, reflecting the hidden suffering of thousands. Marcus managed the storm. He gave interviews, demanded accountability, and filed a lawsuit on her behalf. His voice became a spearhead, cutting through bureaucracy and silence. "This is not just about my mother," he told reporters. "This is about every disabled person treated as less than human. This is about every black person told they don't belong." And people listened. The officer was suspended pending investigation. The department scrambled to control the narrative, issuing statements about misunderstandings and retraining. But the footage was undeniable. No policy could erase the sound of the cane snapping, the sneer on his face, the venom in the words, "You people." For Evelyn, the hardest part wasn't the media frenzy, it was reliving the moment. Each replay of the video was a fresh wound, a reminder of the humiliation, the fear, the vulnerability. But then the letters arrived. One came from a woman in Chicago. "I've been blind since birth. When I saw you hold that broken cane in the air, I cried. You spoke for all of us who have been ignored, dismissed, and doubted. Thank you." Another from a young man in Atlanta. "My mom faced racism every day of her life, and she never spoke up. When you did, I felt like she finally found her voice through you." Evelyn read each one slowly, her fingers trembling as Marcus guided her through the words. And with each letter, she realized something. Her pain had become more than hers. It had become fuel for others. Weeks later, Evelyn and Marcus stood together again, this time not on a street corner, but on the steps of City Hall. A rally had been organized in her name and hundreds had gathered. Signs waved in the air. Justice for Evelyn. Blindness is not weakness. No more silence. Evelyn stood at the microphone, her new cane in hand, a gift from a community that refused to let her walk in darkness again. She tapped it once against the concrete, the sound crisp and steady. Her voice carried strong now, no longer trembling. I never asked to be a symbol. I never wanted to stand here. I only wanted to live with dignity. But dignity is not given, it is demanded. On that day, an officer tried to break more than my cane. He tried to break my spirit, but I am still standing. And I am not standing alone. The crowd erupted. Applause rolled like thunder. She lifted the new cane high. This is not just mine. This belongs to every person who has been silenced. Every person who has been told they don't matter. We are here. We matter, and we will not bow. Marcus stood beside her, tears shining in his eyes. In that moment, he saw not just his mother, but a movement. The consequences were real. The officer faced trial. The city launched reforms on police training regarding disability and racial bias. For once, accountability felt possible. Not guaranteed, but closer than before. And for Evelyn, something shifted within. For years, she had walked quietly, shrinking her pain into silence. Now, her silence had shattered. Her voice had risen. And in its place was a strength she hadn't known she carried. She was no longer just a blind woman surviving the city. She was a fighter. A mother, a leader. The story didn't end with justice served neatly on a silver platter. Real life never does. But it ended with something stronger. Hope. Hope that her broken cane had built a bridge. Hope that her pain had sparked courage in others. Hope that, for once, the world had listened. And as she tapped her new cane against the ground, guiding herself forward, she knew one truth more than any other. They tried to break her. Instead, she had risen. The sound of Evelyn's cane snapping was more than an act of cruelty. It was a reminder of how fragile dignity can feel when placed in the wrong hands. But what followed proved something greater. That silence does not have to be the end of the story. Evelyn stood tall, not because she wasn't afraid, but because fear had followed her for too long. Marcus spoke out not only as a son, but as a defender of justice. And strangers, ordinary people who could have walked away, chose instead to stand, to film, to chant, to carry the truth forward. This story is not just about one woman and one officer. It's about all of us. About how racism often hides in plain sight until a moment of cruelty forces it into the light. It's about the courage it takes to speak when silence feels safer. And it's about the power of unity, how a crowd of witnesses can become a movement, how a broken cane can become a symbol, how humiliation can transform into hope. Evelyn's voice now belongs to everyone who has been told, you don't matter. Her choice to stand that day turned pain into power. And it asks us all a question. When racism shows itself in everyday life, will we walk away or will we stand? This has been another story from Everyday Racism Drama.